So welcome everyone. My name is Sia. I'm the Chief Customer Officer at WithYouWithMe, and I'm delighted to be joined today by three leaders who you see here on the screen who are right in the thick of helping organizations navigate what AI means for their people and the way that they work. Before we jump in, just a quick note that today's session is being recorded, and we will share a copy of that with you afterwards, as well as the slide deck. And we will leave time for questions at the end. So if you do think of something you'd like to ask one of our speakers throughout, just pop that note in the chat and we'll come back to it at the end. Now, before I do properly introduce our panelists, I did want to set a bit of context for the conversation. So firstly, for those who may not know us, WithYouWithMe is an Australian-founded, now global workforce tech company that helps organisations tackle the skills challenge end-to-end. So we work a lot with organisations to help them see their workforce clearly, to understand the skills that they have today and the ones they're going to need tomorrow, but also how to bridge that gap. And often that starts with building skill and capability frameworks that capture what's needed now, but also how those requirements will evolve as technology changes. And then we typically map the skills of an organization's workforce against that framework so that leaders have a really clear data-driven view of what they have, where the gaps are, and where to focus their efforts. And it's quite a good people-first approach, I think, to preparing for automation and augmentation and really helping organizations evolve their people alongside technology rather than behind it. And through that work, we're lucky enough to have a front row seat to how different organizations are approaching AI-driven change. And what has become really clear is that understanding what's happening is one part, but knowing how to take action is where lots of organizations are getting stuck. And that's the gap that we're all here to explore today. The conversation is not just about AI potential, it's about what leaders can practically do now to ensure that their workforces aren't lagging behind. Because while we all know that the hype around AI has been deafening, what I think has become clear is that adoption does not equal transformation. And ironically, technology is just a really small part of that puzzle. And solving that people problem has really emerged as the heart of effective AI enablement. Now, MIT recently released a report which one of our panelists, Matthias from AWS, kindly shared with me, and I'll get Katie to pop a link to that in the chat here. It was their State of AI in Business 2025 research, and it revealed that while 95% of companies are experimenting with AI, only 5% are realizing measurable impact, which is a very shocking figure. Firstly, because I can't believe that 100% of organizations are not experimenting with AI, but the fact that only 5% are succeeding is quite shocking. And what this report found is that those that succeed do tend to have clarity on their workforce skills before, during, and after AI implementation. Clarity on where work is changing, what skills are going to be needed, and how to really evolve their workforce deliberately rather than reactively. So it's a topic I'm very passionate about personally. It's what me and my team are working on with people and organizations every day. We know that generative AI and other types of AI will both automate and augment roles. Tasks are going to shift, some will disappear, new ones are going to emerge. And waiting until those changes are visible at scale often does lead to that situation of panic, sudden restructures, employee anxiety, and perhaps most importantly, missed opportunities. So if we can discuss and understand those changes now at the granular level, we can take those incremental steps and evolve people and roles in tandem with technology. So that is the spirit of today's conversation. Some really practical, data-led and human-focused talk with the tech leaders that you see here who are leading in this space from the front. So without further ado, I will introduce you to our speakers who'll be sharing their unique perspectives. So firstly, we have Craig McFarlane, the Vice President of Enterprise Learning and Skills at Pearson. We have Matthias Otter, who leads the Customer Success Management team for training and certification across APJ at Amazon Web Services. And finally, Paul Baltalk, the Chief Product Officer at WithYouWithMe, who works alongside me to help implement some of these change management strategies. So welcome, gentlemen. Thank you for your time, and let's jump straight in. And Craig, I might kick things off with you because I think there's a question that I know is really on everyone's mind. It's one that we get asked a lot. We're all hearing about how automation and augmentation are reshaping jobs, but how is it actually going to impact the roles within our organizations? And I guess what would be really great is if you could share how you and your team are using, modeling and data to help organizations predict and understand that change and prepare for it.
Sure. Thanks, Sia. Hi, everyone. Pleasure to be here, and thanks for the introduction, Sia. So I can answer the second part of the question first, and then come back to the initial question. So at Pearson, we have a tool which is called Fathom, and so we use world-leading predictive data science models to analyse the impact of emerging technologies like AI on work and jobs. We then apply this model to ABS labour market data and then understand the impact on the Australian job market. And then we work with clients to understand the impacts, on the changes to their organisations. So if we look at automation as a concept, so for many industries, automation has been part of operations for many decades across blue collar roles. So if we're thinking about robotics in manufacturing, I live out in southwest Victoria, down near Warrnambool, and so my next door neighbour is a dairy farmer. And you might think, what kind of impact has AI had on a dairy farmer? But I can tell you it's immense in that all of the cows are wearing their necklaces, which is monitoring all of the vital signs around the cows, so that when they're coming up to be milked, it's actually automates the process of these cows are across to be milked. These cows here need to be seeing a vet because their vital signs, etc., have come up a particular way. And so that automation has meant that instead of having 5 people or 6 people working on that farm, is that they can actually do a milking process with just 2 people. And I had a really interesting conversation with a cameraman as well. I was doing a TV interview, and I asked the cameraman, when you started, how many people were with you for a shoot? And he said, oh, that's a really good question, because it was just him, him with a camera and a light. And he said, actually, there were 3 to 4 people. There was a sound person, there was a cameraman, there was a journo, there'd be someone that was directing it, whereas today there's just one. And that's around these technology-enabled efficiencies that they've been able to realise for those particular roles over an extended period of time. So those development pathways have become disrupted at the same time. So, for example, I asked the cameraman, where did you start? And he said, look, I started as a sound tech, going out and learning the trade and understanding what you need to do when you're in an interview type of environment. And he said one of the challenges is that he doesn't have that, or people coming into the industry don't have that development pathway, so they're not learning across the full spectrum of roles and when they're undertaking those tasks. So the research that we've undertaken related to white collar workforce is that there's 3 technologies in particular that will be responsible for around 80% of AI's effect on the workforce over the next 3 years. So those 3 are robotic process automation. So that's repetitive rule-based tasks such as data entry, processing customer orders and the like. The second is simple chatbots. So we've been using them for years as well. But where there's a formulaic response structure, such as a bank or a service provider, when you call up and your call is directed in certain ways. And then large language model chatbots, which are the more sophisticated responses, so trained on large data sets to generate content. So we're seeing that more and more being integrated into workplaces. And obviously, within the IT sector, there's been that adoption, which is at a much faster rate than within other industries. And so we are seeing a more pronounced augmentation within that sector. Professional services as well, we're seeing a significant augmentation take place. And a lot of it is around those early career roles. And we've got some interesting statistics on that I might be able to share with you later during the discussion today.
It's fascinating, Craig, and great examples. I think they're both very picturesque and tangible ways to understand that technology is, redefining roles as we know it. And I am really interested because I think you spoke really clearly as to, how technology is going to change these roles. But once you do understand that impact, I'm keen to understand some of the strategies for what organizations can do with that. And Paul, this might be one for you that, when you understand that roles are shifting, how do you take that data and turn it into practical action so that the workforce can evolve in step with that technology rather than react to it, down the track?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think as we've been working through this, like one of the things we're noting here is that the rate of change is getting faster, and interestingly, we have to sort of get to a place where we're kind of normalizing the notion of being in progress. So a part of what we need to be able to do here is we need to be able to take that technology impact, and we need to be able to map it through to things that are tangible within a person's role. So one of the ways that we sort of focus on that, one of the ways that we've been noticing is that if you take that technology impact and then match it through to a capability framework, capability frameworks express themselves in terms of things that people can really sort of like hang on to. So the outcomes and the responsibilities that you might expect someone to achieve at a particular level of work. So from that, you can then start to think about the idea of like, well, okay, if this is what's going to be impacted, what do people do around that? I might actually quickly share a visual of this, which might help us recognize it and think it through. And interestingly, my screen. Okay, let's hope we get the right screen.
Yeah, we got you.
Okay, great. So this is one way to look at this. This is actually some anonymized real data from a marketing department. What we've done is we've mapped that marketing department through to actually the Sophia capability framework. Sophia is interesting in that each of the skills is kind of unique. They don't overlap. They represent kind of like a Lego brick that builds up the role. And then within each of those skills, there is actually a level associated with it. And each of the levels is quite principled as well. So for example, level 1 in the Sophia framework is follow. Level 2 is assist, and it sort of works all the way through to the point where you're inspiring and leading within your organization. What we've actually done here is we've mapped out all the roles within a marketing department. The numbers represent the number of roles that require that particular skill at that level. And the heat mapping is actually around gaps to requirement. So in other words, we've assessed what's required to achieve a role, and now we're looking at the difference between the team's capability and what's actually required. What's beautiful is we've actually taken, this is actually some Fathom data that we matched through. Actually, sorry, that's the wrong one. Let's go back to this one. This is actually some Fathom data that we matched through. And what we're doing here is we're showing how, and Craig mentioned this, those entry-level roles are most impacted, and that sort of reflects itself in the capability framework, because what you can see here is that the lower levels of capability are the levels that are impacted. So then this starts to lead to the idea of like, well, how do I respond to this? And obviously there's some really strategic stuff around the idea of like, how do we redesign our organizations and you know, how do we restructure roles? And we might talk a bit more about that. But even at the outset, there are some simple strategies that can be applied, particularly with respect to like those LLM agents that Craig spoke about. So for example, if we were to focus in on content publishing here, we can see that there's an impact at levels 2 and 3. Level 4 just happens to be the first level at which you have enough knowledge to guide other people. And so this starts to lead to an actual practical strategy. And that strategy would be look at places where you need to get your people through to that level at which they would normally lead other people, because that's the types of skills that are required to be able to operate those LLMs and the augmentation. So that's an example of a simple strategy, but really we're sort of thinking to ourselves that you really want to start in a place where you understand capability, you understand what's required, you're already in a place where you're helping people to build skill and capability so it doesn't seem overwhelming, and then you start to look at data like this and focus in on specific areas that will get them to the place where they can use the tech.
I love that, Paul, and I think it lends really nicely to some articles I've seen from Matthias around the human and AI balance. And you know, Matthias, you've written, I think it was called The Human AI Paradox, an article that, and it really talks about the integration of AI outperforming replacement. And I'd love to know from what you're seeing across AWS customers, how are you and organizations finding that balance between automation and human capability?
To be honest, I think everyone is finding it really hard, right? Because what we see a lot is old patterns of thinking, which is I replace humans with AI. I get AI to do the same thing that a human could do, or part of the same type of work that a human could do, and therefore I replace. And the replacement is usually triggered. I'm probably conscious that I was a consultant in my previous life, right? So if I put myself in the shoes of a consultant, how do I find a quick business case for the customer? And it's usually by removing staff somehow. You're probably aware there was one of the major banks in the press a couple of weeks ago with a bit of an AI implementation that they went a bit pear-shaped and ended up on the front page of the AFR. And one part of the report was they obviously tried to replace people and didn't do their consultation properly, and probably a couple of other things, had to re-employ them. But one caveat was in there. There was a lady who was in the contact center for 25 plus years, and they got her to write up all the customer interactions and typical conversations. And she didn't know she would write this up for the AI to be trained on. And I think that's a prime example why AI integration with humans outperforms the replacement of humans, because the humans still have the knowledge. The AI is not context aware, right? So the AI is trained on a large amount of data, but it is not necessarily aware who you are, where you live, what you do, what your circumstances are, and so on and so forth. That's what the human does, right? And then I think to Craig's point, and also to Paul's point, is we need to help preserve this knowledge to a degree, right? But we also need to enable people to work with AI. And this requires the skills that Paul pulled out. So you now need to be able to direct someone. Imagine you have a super smart junior assistant on your side that works 24/7 for you. How do you instruct that? You wouldn't give the graduate the EXCO report to write and would pass it on without any further validation. So we need to get people to understand how AI works, what it can do, what the limitations are, and then how do I co-work with this AI and how do I maximize the use of it, whilst we retain the knowledge that is required to create a good customer experience in this example of one of the major banks. And I think when you think about workforce, we have a very transactional slice of workforce in every company. And I'm afraid that slice will probably go, right? It's just, that can be replaced very, very quickly. There's very little hope for these roles. Then you have a more strategic workforce, and that's what Paul mentioned already. These are people who understand how to leverage technology for their benefit, for the benefit of the organization. And you have a layer that sits in the middle. They do some sort of mishmash of type of work, which is partially transactional and partially it's a bit more value creating. And that's the slice of workforce you want to focus on. You want to push up to the more strategic workforce, because these are the people you need to think about how do we use AI in future to be more productive and to get more with what we have.
I like that concept of looking at it from transactional to strategic workforce. I think it makes a lot of sense. And Craig, I might go to you on this next one, which is, where this change is happening first. And I know, the work you do with Pearson and certainly Fathom, when you're looking across industries, where are you seeing the most significant shifts in how work is being reshaped, and what type of roles or functions are more likely to be affected first, I suppose, as part of this transactional workforce Matthias spoke of?
Well, I'm going to echo a lot of what Matthias has, some of the points that Matthias has made, with some statistics as well from some of our Fathom analysis that we've undertaken. So if we look at it from a task perspective, the tasks that are most transformed by tech are largely the routine or repetitive that Matthias mentioned before, so correcting errors, maintaining systems, rewriting programs, updating software, or performing network backups. We recently released a skills outlook report, which I'm happy to share with everybody that's on the call today. And this was looking at the industries most at risk of being impacted or augmented in the next 3 years. And so those 4 industries that are at the top of the list was professional, scientific, and technical services. So RPA, tasks that could be undertaken by RPA was about 17.1% of the tasks in that in those jobs, which are repetitive rule-based type tasks, so data entry analysis. The early career roles would also be most affected. So again, echoing what we're all saying here, that's a real challenge. I think if you're a graduate coming out of university right now is actually where you get that experience, which is a catch-22 for those graduates coming out, because an employer needs experience. And so I think that there's a really important discussion around how we prepare people entering the workforce. And we released another report which was called Lost in Transition. It was looking at the actual impact to GDP of that transition between a formal education into the workforce and that gap in actually skills that a graduate would need when they're moving in. Into the workforce. The second sector was the financial and insurance services sector. So if we take bookkeepers, about 10 to 20% of time is spent operating financial software. Accountants is another one that people talk about quite a bit. But if we think about back when Excel was introduced into the market, which was recently, the anniversary was recently held, that was going to be the end of accountancy. Well, it's not. It's how do we actually use these tools and integrate that into our work? So how do we actually leverage this technology? And so approximately 14% of the work undertaken by accountants, we have forecast would be able to be automated by RPA, which means that those accountants can then have greater focus on the more strategic tasks around advisory with their clients and those types of interactions. The third sector was health and social care administration. So we're thinking medical receptionists, 22%, that's like 1 day a week, could actually be undertaken by RPA. Simple chatbots as well, 11%. Large language models, about 2.5%. So again, thinking very creatively about how we integrate or how we augment those roles and really redefine what that role does. And so that's where we come back to what Paul was talking about there from the task perspective. And the fourth sector being manufacturing. So looking at AI and technology around predictive analytics. So for example, a production manager, there are efficiencies that could be realized through the utilization of such technologies. So Pearson's data just reinforces that those common early career job roles are among the most exposed to new technologies. So this is not a warning about automation. It's instead a call to rethink how we prepare young people for work. So education and training must adapt to how jobs will be done tomorrow and not how jobs were defined in the past. So task focus, such as working with others, supervision, training and project discussions, they're probably going to be the least impacted that we can see from our data.
Interesting stuff, and certainly a conversation that I hope is happening in the education systems as well. I'm sure it is. It's the other end of the spectrum with what organisations are dealing with. And I guess like just really good to hear some of those numbers, Craig, 14% impact, that's almost a day, between half a day and a day a week of those jobs changing. And Paul, I might throw to you on this one, that once you do have that clarity in terms of what's changing and how roles and skills need to adjust, how can organisations redesign roles and teams without overwhelming their people or creating that fear? Because I think when you hear the statistic that 14% of your role is going to change, that in itself might be a little bit, well, what do we do? There's that fear. What would you recommend?
I think again, one of the key pieces is you don't necessarily need to redesign absolutely everything. So there are a lot of what we just described is automation and augmentation of capabilities that exist within existing roles. So we're not necessarily replacing everyone, we're replacing components of a role. And so again, it would be about the idea of identifying valuable directions to go in terms of upskilling and then incrementally moving towards those. So understanding capability, understanding what your organization needs to succeed, and then getting people into that mindset of like, oh, okay, fine, it's time to start learning. So knowing where you want to go helps you, and knowing what an incremental step towards that looks like helps you reduce that sort of stress around the idea of like, well, what do I do next? So that would be one aspect. Again, it's really all about that idea of normalizing the notion of being in progress. The other one would be around being a little bit, as an organization, being a little bit open to the idea that, there's some significant disruption happening now. So for example, one of the things we've noticed is that the cost of experimentation is just plummeting. And that kind of leads to a situation where your ideas people, I'm a software developer, ideas people are actually often quite annoying because they're all like, hey, can't you build X or Y? And then you start to try to explain just how complex that is and how much time it is and have they thought about the cost benefits, what have you. these things kind of shut those individuals down. But interestingly, now you're in a place where whether it's a business, whether it's a business process or whether it's actually software that you're designing, the cost of that experimentation is reduced so dramatically that you can start to leverage those ideas people within your organizations. And to Matthias's example, rather than using someone and replacing them with AI, perhaps you should be looking at the idea of, well, what do they know that we haven't thought about for a while, and how could we utilize that capability? So that would definitely be one aspect I'd look at. Start to think about your people as disruptive resources.
I love that. And I think, underpinning all of that as well, Paul, is this idea of constant learning, that normalizing evolution, normalizing growth. And to go back to you, Matthias, I think one of the strongest themes from that MIT research is that the real barrier isn't infrastructure, it's learning. And you do a lot in this space. So I'd love to hear from you how you think leaders can create that learning culture that's as adaptive as the technology that, itself, I guess.
Yeah, I think before we do that, let's look at a couple of statistics, right? So just pulling a couple of things out of the article I pasted there. So we have about 48% of employees using AI against company policies. Right? We got 56% of people that use AI making mistakes due to AI use. 66% rely on AI output without evaluating accuracy, and 42% are uncomfortable admitting that they actually use AI. I think that talks to something that means you need to help people to understand what AI is, how it works, what it can do, what it can't do, where the limitations are, and what you need to watch out for. And we are not doing this. There's only 24% of the workforce here in Australia that have actually been receiving formal training on AI. Right? But then also to Paul's point, we need to get people to work with it and experiment with it in a safe space. And I think that's where you get the most output. What we see in companies is a lot where, again, I don't want to blame everything on the consultant, but also potentially be a bit on the big tech companies, right? So you come in and say, here's the big project that we prescribe you, the big disruptor that gets you to new heights in value realization and cost minimization. That's sort of prescribed from the top because it looks like a great idea. And that's part of that stuff that sometimes fails then, because the people that are impacted by it or have to work with it are not prepared for it. My approach is usually that I go in and say, well, take your team, run an ideation session. How do you use AI? Can you identify use cases for AI in your workplace? Because that gets everyone to think about, what is AI? How can I use it? How can I get rid of this niggly task that I have to do every week, which I really hate, and it's just a resource monster that takes so much time away from me. Let's say you have to draft a report every week. Right? You need to scrape data, you need to clean up the data, you need to produce a couple of visuals, create a narrative, and some sort of recommendation base of it. 4/5 of these value chain you can run through the AI if you know how to use it, right? And if you know what can go pear-shaped. So work with your team, let them experiment, let them find their own little pockets where they think they can use AI, and let them experiment around with it. Usually these pockets are also the low risk pockets, right? Because these pockets will be most likely in a non-customer facing established process. That's what you try to get rid of first and what you try to automate or augment with AI, which means it puts you on the path of the least risk exposure. Right? The big ticket items that we see and that make it to the front page of the AFR are usually the ticket items where you try to angle for a new novel solution that is customer facing. If that stuff goes pear-shaped, well, then you definitely have a spot reserved in the AFR front page gallery, right? So you want to be very careful, especially if we don't know sometimes how AI reacts over time and what it learns from the data we expose it to and additional data. If then you get a biased output in a decision-making of, say, a mortgage approval process, that will certainly attract the attention of the broader public. So my advice is learn about AI, get your teams really to experiment and to think about their own work that they do. What would they like to get rid of? That's most likely a good candidate. The compound of these small little benefits or the small little projects you find, the compound is as big as the big juicy project you build in. But it's a lot less risk prone. You get people to be AI confident because they start working with AI and learning from AI, and they start identifying use cases. And the next level up, they will identify much bigger use cases, much better use cases.
That's great advice, Matthias. And I'd love to sort of round it out, I guess, by going back to you, Craig, with I guess that overarching strategy piece as well. So you've got the incremental, embedding it into your everyday. From your perspective, once you've given organizations that visibility of change, how can leaders then be using it to shape workforce strategy, investment, and capability plan before that disruption hits as well?
It's a really good question. See, and I think that one of the factors that people often don't think about is the investment upfront in actually embedding AI into the workflows, et cetera, within organizations. So, I mean, I work with clients and they come to me and they might ask, we want to, include AI within our assessments that we're currently conducting through Pearson. Now, we would say, sure, let's do this in a very safe and structured manner so that we can determine where the process efficiencies can be realized, et cetera. But that also means that you're going through a double process there for a period of time. So it's actually costing more than less. So having that, you're being cognizant that it's going to cost money in that initial phase and costs investment in training of teams so that they can understand how to be using the technologies, to then be reviewing the use of the technologies and to be safe and comfortable. And depending on what your industry is, sometimes that's extremely important, thinking regulatory sectors with high regulation. So there's that part of it. And I mean, ultimately, nobody has a crystal ball. And so there are a few key steps that you can take to get ahead. And so I think first and foremost, aside from that investment part and thinking about that, is to actually understand the technologies that are relevant to your industry and your organization. So many people that are in decision-making roles actually making decisions without around AI adoption and utilization without fundamental understanding of the technologies that are out there. And I think that is a big risk. And so coming back to Matthias's point, I think having that foundational knowledge and understanding is really critical across the organization to then be experimenting within a safe way. Another area that I suggest is mapping your organization job roles and understanding the changes that are already impacting roles. So which job tasks are being introduced to job roles, which job tasks are no longer required within certain job roles, what new technologies can be introduced, how will this impact workflows, learning from industry peers. There's a lot, you can't go to any conference without AI being front and center in discussions, and they're really useful for hearing how other people are navigating these changes and looking at how they're augmenting their processes and really embedding some of the new technologies into their workflows. So learning from industry peers, learn from adjacent industries and key job families that are most likely to be impacted from new technologies, and looking at these beyond just your sector as well, and really staying aware of what's happening in the broader market. I think redesigning roles at a task level is where we can start unlocking some of the hidden value within existing workforces. And when I talk about this, I don't disagree with Paul at all in that we need to be thinking about this very smartly on how we actually introduce the technologies, and then understanding more broadly what the impact is within the workforce, and then where the reskilling requirements are. So it's not necessarily around reducing staff numbers, but it can be around increasing capacity. For example, helping 15 engineers to go from responding to 20 projects to 40 projects, refocusing of roles that we mentioned before with some of the statistics. So a programmer undertaking less routine coding, instead focusing on ensuring the quality of AI code as an example. But I think that having that real foundational understanding is essential. And a case in point, I was in Malaysia a week and a half ago, and I was there 2 months prior to this, and it was the same group of people. And 2 months ago, I asked them, who here is using, and they're all from the banking and financial services sector. Who here within their workplace has, a Copilot or a similar type of support that they can be using in their day-to-day work? The vast majority of people in the room put their hands up. And then the next question, the obvious question, was who here is actually utilizing it on a daily basis? And only about a third of the hands went up. And when I was there a week and a half ago, about half the room put their hands up. So we can actually see that there's greater experimentation. It is very specific country by country too, when I go and have conversations around Asia Pacific, around the adoption and how it's being integrated. But I think, those misconceptions that it's going to immediately save me money, sure, in some ways, perhaps, but you also have to be thinking about this from an investment perspective and ensuring that the funds are there so that you can correctly integrate these technologies into, the existing workflows within the business.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And I think another thing I'd like to explore, I guess, is, how do we bring people along for the journey in terms of the role of the manager? So we often speak about leadership, understanding the change and setting the strategy, and then individuals needing to do the training or the reskilling or the AI literacy. But I think the role of the manager is actually a critical one in making sure that direction and progress is made. Paul, if you could talk a little bit through how you think of this in terms of managers ensuring people have the skills that they need.
Sure. I think this kind of cuts to a number of points that have been made around, like we're observing the idea that work is changing, and a lot of the work that is changing is that more transactional stuff, that more entry level, that more simplistic stuff, which means that, and I think even the word manager actually gives us a clue to this. It means that we're probably going to need to see a shift away from the notion of management, as in I have a group of people who I am checking the quality of the processes that they operate, towards leadership. I have a group of people who are fundamentally creating things in a less sort of mechanical way, and therefore I need to act as a leader of those people rather than a manager. Which means you're going to be in that place where you're dealing with people. You're having to bring emotional intelligence to work, and those types of skills as well. So that the people that you are leading forward can be creative, can feel safe in these quite complex and changing environments, as opposed to just kind of ticking the boxes on the work that they're doing. So I think we're going to see a bit of a shift in that sense, and you're going to see that shift pushed down in the organization. I think a lot of organizations treat leadership development as something that happens at a certain tier once people have demonstrated a certain level of capability. If you think about what we're describing here, we're going to have less people down at the bottom layer of organizations. We're going to have better what we might currently call junior managers and junior leaders. I think the development that's required around all this, in terms of how business processes are changing, in terms of how skills, this actually represents an amazing opportunity for people to begin that process of leadership, because it's kind of like that place where you reach out and you support people in their development, that in their eyes you become a leader as opposed to a manager. So there's lots of opportunity there, and lots of ground for people to kind of like develop those leadership skills. That's what I see being needed.
Yeah, no, that's great, Paul. I am conscious of time, but Matthias, I'd really love to close out with this idea of the business case, because I think conceptually a lot of people on this call will be on board with what we're talking about, but there's always the need to build that business case. And traditionally, organizations have justified transformation through cost savings or workforce reduction, as we've all kind of touched on. But there is a growing recognition that these short-term cuts can cost you dearly later, particularly if you're losing the very talent that knows how to create the next wave of productivity and innovation. So how do you frame the business case for investing in skills and capability, for building that long-term productivity rather than just short-term efficiency gains?
And that's so you saw I pulled already slides up in anticipation, but it's a really interesting question, right? Because what we still find is a lot of short-term and old thinking. And when I say old thinking, is about L&D or learning is a cost component, right? It just costs and takes time away from my employees, and therefore it's not great for productivity and business outcomes. people still start thinking in layers of spans, in layers and spans of control, right? So which is also, how can I reduce layers? How can I reduce spans of control? Which is nothing else than a staff reduction play, right? So these are really old-fashioned ways of thinking that we can't allow anymore in the new world of AI. When I look at finally at learning and how to get someone to acknowledge that we need to do something for the workforce, the best way works for me from a risk angle, right? So if you look at organizational readiness has three components. One is the tech component. Let's say the tech component someone can manage, right? Then we have the internal organization. So is our workforce actually ready to use this stuff and work with it? And the third component is external readiness. Is the customer willing to accept that? Let's assume the customer is happy to accept working with AI and AI output. And we all know how much we love these chat systems. When you're on the big airline chat system, this thing goes around in circles, right? So I usually say, and when I talk to business leaders, I pull this slide up and say, let's assume you have 5 buckets of people in your company. From really skeptic people to super AI experts who know how to strategically use AI to their benefit and to the benefit of the company. From a risk perspective, what percentage of these 5 buckets can you afford across the workforce? And the more you are going to the left, so the more skeptics, novices, or experimenters you have, the bigger is the risk that something goes pear-shaped, because these people don't understand how AI works and what they need to look out for. Right? And all of a sudden, risk and risk appetite becomes the driver for learning and people development. Again, when I look at organizational readiness, everyone has these great ideas that inform an AI strategy and a roadmap. At some point, you need to do a stock take and say, are we actually ready to deploy all this stuff? Is our organization, are our people ready to work with this? And can our people actually entertain this new technology and put their finger up if they think something is wrong? Can they actually detect when something goes pear-shaped or is wrong? And you see on the bottom, it says ethical, responsible, and humanistic AI. So humanistic AI is what killed CBA, right, in the example I gave earlier. They didn't look at the humanistic aspect, that AI should serve humanity and the people working in an organization, right? They use that to eliminate people. So if you have a shortcoming on any of these levels, you're most likely to see a risk exposure increasing. And this is how I start talking to organizations. I say, well, you need to follow basically 4 steps. You need to have an AI confident workforce. That's everyone. Everyone needs, and no one needs to understand in super technical detail how you tweak a machine learning model, how you train it, what top P, top K, and temperature are doing. Most of us will not have anything to do with that. But all of us need to understand what AI is, how it works, what it can do, what it can't do, what hallucinations are, and that you need to have a good level of critical thinking and pattern recognition. The next thing, and I talked already about this, is go and do use case identification. This is how people start thinking about, how can I use AI for my own benefit? How can I get rid of the niggly tasks that I don't want to do? The next level up is, now you have all these nice use cases. You need to evaluate them from a responsible, ethical, and humanistic perspective, because they can trip you over at some point, right? Especially if you have a workforce that's not set up properly. And the last level is, and I haven't met anyone who's really thinking deeply about this. If you envision you have a workforce which is like, say, 50% humans, 50% agents, how do they actually work together? Who has the last say? Who can escalate? If you see or if you think something goes pear-shaped. The AI agent doesn't take input. Yeah, the AI agent processes. So I think this is how I usually, that's my little spiel to get people to think about how important it is to get people to learn about AI and to work with AI.
That's really valuable, Matthias. And these visuals are really good too. So we'll make sure that we do circulate those with the pack at the end of this session. I'm very conscious of time. There's always so much to talk about on this topic. We've had a couple of questions. I see you've answered one of them already, Matthias, which is great. But one from Bailey that's just come through. Organizational AI readiness and the perception that having lots of novice experimenters is an organizational risk is an interesting point. I'm curious for Matthias's perspective on how we might support people currently not in school or the workforce, so mature age employees, technologically disadvantaged people, etc., to develop the base level of digital and AI literacy to succeed when the number of entry-level roles are also being stripped away? Good question.
I need to ponder about that a bit. I can't give you a picture perfect answer for that now. Sorry. I'm happy, Paul, if you want to reach out to me on LinkedIn, I'm happy to take that with you on that one.
Oh, I'm sorry. It is Paul, not Bailey. Sorry, Paul.
Oh, sorry.
I've
Yeah,
read that name wrong. Anything any of our other panelists want to add on that one?
I mean, I think interestingly, one of the aspects of the user experience from LLM chatbots in particular is that they actually don't require a great deal of technical knowledge. They require you to be able to think through what you're seeing and then respond to that. So I'm not sure that it's a question so much as making people who are older and more experienced tech literate. I think it's just making sure that they are aware of the level of failure that can come out of it. One of the interesting things about LLMs is when they are wrong, unlike a junior employee who's probably only going to be wrong by a small percentage because they're kind of like they're keeping everything in context, in space, they could still be wrong, but LLMs can actually be shockingly wrong. And so really it's I think it's a few strategies around that. The user experience, the interface is very intuitive. Then you've just got to be aware of the fact that, you know, you could get a shockingly wrong answer, and watch out for that, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
No,
and
that's great.
recognize that LLMs are people pleasers. They will do
Yes.
everything to please you, even to guide you into the absolutely wrong direction with
Yeah.
complete certainty.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. All right, guys, we might have to leave it there. I do see a couple of extra comments, so I'll make sure we follow up with you afterwards. But I know we are at time. So just a thank you again to Craig, Paul, and Matthias for sharing your insights and experiences so openly. It is a very valuable discussion, obviously not just about technology, but about what it really means for people, roles, and the future of work. So thank you. And to everyone who joined us and contributed your questions and thoughts along the way, it's wonderful. We will send a copy of today's recording around so that you can revisit that conversation or share it with your teams. But in the meantime, please feel free to connect either with myself or our panelists on LinkedIn. As you can tell, I think everyone here loves to talk about this, so we're very happy to continue sharing ideas. Thank you again and have a wonderful day ahead.
Thank you.